Hello and welcome to another episode of the Little Knowledge Podcast with me, Paul Busby, and with Goff Morgan. Hello, Goff.
Hello, how are you? Good evening. Greetings, Joe. How are you doing?
You sound very clear, Goff.
Clear as a bell, you know. It's my years of theatrical training and configuring the microphone correctly.
It all helps, I think.
It helps. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. You look very tidy about the upper head, Mr. Busby. Have you had a post-COVID haircut?
Well, although nature was trying its best to remove all the hair from my head, sometimes you need professional help to help it along. Yeah, I haven't had a haircut since the Great Plague descended. Yeah, so it was indeed. Beyond, it's about time.
Well, you look very neat.
Thank you.
Very neat.
Cefn Mably, Goff. That's what we're doing tonight. Cefn Mably. What did you know? I always ask you this, don't I? What did you know about Cefn Mably before you jumped into this particular pool?
Cefn Mably House still exists. It was one of the houses that was saved under that practice at the time of converting them into luxury apartments. So though it still exists as a property and there are preserved and conserved interiors, it is now a gated property, and the gates of Cefn Mably, when you get there, you can't go any further in, so you can't see what's there anymore. But the house still exists. It was once in the ownership of the Lords of Tredegar. It was bought by Courtney Morgan, Lord, let me get this right now, 3rd Lord Tredegar, as essentially a hunting lodge. And he eventually gave it over as a TB clinic. So for a long time, Cefn Mably House was a TB quarantine clinic. Prior to that, it was owned by the Chemist family, Tint family. Okay. And it dates from around about the late 1600s.
Not bad.
I'm not sure.
Not bad at all. Well, it's a very old site, like so many we talk about. A really old site, lots of history. Jumping into this, I knew just what you said. I didn't know much more than that. The Chemist family popped up now and then. But jumping in this time, I'm surprised at how much history is there. I really am. This has been quite a fun one to explore. I mean, even starting off from its origins. Cefn Mably, Mabel's Ridge. So you think, well, who is
really?
Mabel?
How lovely. Yeah.
Who is Mabel? Well, Mabel was very much a high flyer. She was the daughter of Robert Fitzhamon, this huge Norman lord and conqueror.
What do you mean, very fat Norman lord, or?
Oh no, huge as in power. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about his girth. Very powerful man. I wouldn't want to cross him.
Very portly lord.
No, I have no idea about his girth, but powerful man who had no sons but 4 daughters. Mabel was one of them. And fortunately for Mabel, her 3 sisters all decided to become nuns. So Mabel had a huge inheritance, and she married the Earl of Gloucester, who was the natural son of King Henry I. So this is someone with great connections. And people believe that it was Mabel who built the first property on the site, hence the name to this day, Cefn Mably.
So Mabel, what year was that then?
Well, she died in 1107.
Oh gosh, sure. Right. Well, look at that. Right back into the 12th century then.
Right back.
Didn't know that at all.
But the family you mentioned, the Chemist family, they sort of appear in the 14th, 15th century. And they are the ones essentially that owned Cefn Mably right up until Lord Tredegar buying it. We'll have a little look at Cefn Mably just to give you an idea. Okay. There we go. Now, the reason I'm showing you this at the moment is it's not a great painting, really, but it does what we need at this juncture. Yeah. Because
am I right, before we go any longer?
Yeah,
I think this might be a Getty image. Do you think?
You're always so quick to pick up on these little hints and clues. Not like a razor. Well, as you can see, symmetry meant nothing to these people in architecture. No. But that's because they sort of continued building and adding bits. So you can probably tell that...
Is there a chapel on the left?
There is indeed. What we have here is the more modern eastern wing is Queen Anne, that sort of period. There are 2 jutting wings going out there, the service wings, and this bit is built around a courtyard. Okay.
Oh, interesting.
As you go through the door, you have the old Great Hall, which is actually a lot older than people thought. They now believe it is mid-16th century, so 1560s, 1570s, which goes to the old parlour. And then you've got two long galleries, the soldiers' gallery below, and the one we'll come back to, the dancing gallery above, which takes you all the way to a 19th century chapel.
19th century chapel, right.
So you've got Queen Anne, you've got Tudor, and you've got a bit of Victorian. Very much, actually, what you talked about a couple of weeks ago, about what Victorians do to churches. It's very much that sort of style. But the first one I want to talk to about, we start our chemist story, if you don't mind. I've got two colourful characters. Now, and I just want to say to you that if you remember a couple of weeks ago, you brought up the Herberts. And a terrible mayor of Newport was a Herbert.
Miles Herbert.
Well, the chemist family were very close to the Herberts. And I've got something else. If Prothero was the worst town clerk of Newport, if the Herbert was the worst mayor of Newport, can I go for the worst High Sheriff of Glamorgan, please?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Because in this Tudor period, he built the main hall. Edward Chemist. Edward Chemist. Now, this is his track record of being High Sheriff. I've got it in front of me. I need this. 1576, High Sheriff of Glamorgan. This is the time when the pirates roamed free around Newport and the surrounding areas. And the Captain Jack Sparrow of his day was Jack Chalice, or Jack Callis, whichever it was pronounced. It would appear that Edward Chemist didn't mind Jack Callis. And like a lot of the aristocratic families of the area, they covered up the piracy because they had a cut.
That's quite, well, the Morgans did. The Morgans did.
Exactly, the Morgans did as well.
They refused to cooperate with one investigation because they'd owned the ships that were doing the piracy.
Yeah, it's the same sort of thing. But this was even worse and more blatant because they arrested two of the pirates and Edward Chemist released them illegally. Just released two of them. So the Admiralty summoned him and he found a way of getting out of this case. He just didn't bother turning up. And they let it go. In fact, so much so, a couple of years later, they made him a Justice of the Peace. 1585, they make him High Sheriff again. This time, he's accused of selling county offices. I like to think this is like Walker from Dad's Army, a Tudor stiff who offers you the under-sheriff position, the clerk of the county, and the county jailer was available for the right price.
Oh, good grief.
One person who didn't like this was the deputy jailer in Cardiff, John Hughes. But that's all right, because Edward had a solution to this. He jailed the deputy jailer, John Hughes.
I'm back to enjoying a baddie again. It's just they're just so blatant, aren't they, at this period? It really. But I often say that this period, we think of the ruling families through the filter of 19th century aristocracy, whereas they're not. These are gangland bosses at this point. I mean, these are people with packs of followers and hangers on, and they go out. And if you have an argument with a bloke who owns the property next door, you just go and fight it out with your followers. I mean, they're not refined people. They are crooks.
They're not. Well, they're certainly ruthless.
Literally, there's more Don Corleone than
Goff,
aristocrats.
Do you mind, Goff? You were referring to the High Sheriff of Glamorgan. There was he didn't get into trouble over that either, as far as we know. 1595, they appoint him High Sheriff again. There was more selling of offices, but this time he went a bit too far. His friends, the Herberts, 3 of Sir William Herbert's men were imprisoned in Cardiff, and his brother took 20 men to free them. There was a vicious fighting in Cardiff with the result of 1 death. So there had to be a jury. Fortunately, Edward Chemist packed the jury and chose as the adjudicating officer Sir William Herbert. It was decided whose brother was on trial.
I'm going to say, yes, a peculiar choice in some respects.
Not really, because they were all found innocent. And, but this was far too much and far too blatant, so that other families that didn't like the Chemist family and the Herberts complained. And Star Chamber got involved, and we do know what happened here. Edward Chemist and Sir William Herbert had a £500 fine and spent some time in the Fleet prison.
Oh, good Lord.
1605, they appoint him High Sheriff again. Now, we don't know this time. There's nothing to suggest he did anything bad this time, but he might have got so good at doing things badly that he covered up his traces. The local aristocrats, Edward Stradlin, wrote in exasperation about Edward Kemmis, "Would God I had the time to write a chronicle of this man's doings." And in the paneling, on the paneling of the Great Hall in Cefn Mably were the initials EK 1575. So it really was Edward Kemmis's Hall.
That is quite. I'm very fond of him already.
That's not bad. But
no. Yes, as a completely scurrilous villain of a man, he's wonderful, isn't he?
Indeed.
But you're right, it's funny. So they persist in doing this. I mean, they did something similar to the Morgan family prior to Battle of Bosworth. You know, one of the chaplains in charge of the place at the time, John Morgan, was spent all his time chiseling Richard III. Then they overturned Richard III, and then they put him in the same place. And despite warning that he shouldn't be handling the taxes for the county, they put him back in charge. He carries on chiseling Henry VII. You know, they were just so barefaced about it. Yeah. But also everybody seems to know, oh no, he won't do it again. He's done it again. Oh, well, he won't do it again.
Did it again. But a few generations on, we talked about Raglan Castle last time, didn't we? With the great Marquis of Worcester and Civil War sort of heroism. Someone, I had heard of him, of course, but I hadn't heard of Sir Nicholas Kemmis of Cefn Mably, who was equally, not equally rich, but in Parliament's eye, equally a pain to them. Right. He was a huge man. Now, he was a big man, this one. He was enormous. He loved wrestling. So, right. Very strong. They said he was the strongest man in the kingdom. Enormous character. We don't unfortunately have a portrait to hand of Sir Nicholas Kemmis. Huge man. There's a great story that a Cornish wrestler turned up at Cefn Mably with a donkey and said, "Are you the strong Nicholas Kemmis?" And he said, "I am." Probably with a far more booming voice than me could manage, actually. Yeah. "I am," he said.
Yeah, let's get a squeaky voice, right?
The Cornishman said, "I've never been thrown. Would you like to try?" And within a very few seconds, Nicholas Kemmis had thrown him on the floor very easily. Yeah. Nicholas helped him up and said, "Do you now acknowledge that I am a very fine wrestler?" He said, "No, not unless you throw me over that wall." So he threw him over that wall. As he threw the Cornish wrestler over the wall, and as he landed on the other side, he said, "Yes, but my donkey, what about my donkey?" Nicholas then threw the donkey over the wall.
I was wondering what was going to happen to the donkey. I am now relieved.
There are two versions of this story. There's that one, and John Curl Fletcher, the Newport historian, said that he thought it was a poacher with a donkey, and Nicholas thrown the poacher and the donkey. Either way, someone and a donkey went over that wall.
Went over the wall. Yeah.
And for a while at Cefn Mably, there was people would point it out. This is where the strong Nicholas threw him over the wall. Nicholas Kemmis was made, again, before the Civil War. King Charles I is giving out honours, like candy, hoping to firm up support. So Sir Nicholas was knighted in 1641, made a baronet in 1642, and he really was one of King Charles I's greatest and most loyal of champions. Not only did he and his son raise a regiment of foot, he also fought. He didn't have the money of the Marquises of Worcester, but he had the fighting spirit. And his arms at the time were a mailed fist holding a sword, with his motto was, "If this holds, woe to the Roundhead." He fought at the siege of Gloucester. He fought at the Battle of Naseby in 1645, where when King Charles I was unhorsed, we're told Sir Nicholas Kemmis managed to hold off the parliamentarians, allowing the king to escape.
Oh, great.
The king gave him a ring as a thank you that belonged to his father, and that can still be seen at Southside House in Wimbledon to this day.
Oh, gosh, isn't that cool?
But as we know, as we found out last time, 1646 was the fall of Raglan.
Yeah.
And it was pretty downhill from there, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's always, So was Cefn Mably part of Charles's failed royal progress up through the marches? Did he go
No,
there?
because he went a mile away to Rupera Castle. That's where he
Ah,
stayed
right,
in
I
that region.
see. Right, okay. Yes, I knew he went to Rupera, but I wonder if he popped into Cefn Mably on the way up, sort of thing.
Well, they're so
Oh,
close.
it's fascinating. Yeah, it's
So
a very
near.
interesting period, this.
It is.
The
Well,
ramifications last for a very, very long time in the Civil War. We tend to think, we don't think of it as a singular event which was decided in battle. The ramifications run for the best part of a century.
absolutely,
The outcome of the and didn't really settle even then properly. It's a very fascinating story, which we don't really do an awful lot of so much anymore, which is a pity.
No, I can't believe I hadn't heard of Sir Nicholas Kemmis. He's such a colourful character, because what he does is he is arrested after the fall of Raglan, and he's taken ill. He's quite ill. He's in his 60s by this point when he's fighting.
Gosh.
Real 60s, not a Marquis of Worcester 60s, which is 23, if you remember from last time. So he gets taken ill at Bath. He's allowed to go to Bath, for his health. But around about that time, 1648, the Second Civil War flares up, and Pembroke Castle is held for the royalists. Now, he's done his bit, right? He's old for the time. He's ill. So what he decides to do, with 160 men, he takes Chepstow for the king.
Good grief.
He takes Chepstow Castle. He has to retreat there when the Battle of St. Fagans, possibly the largest battle ever in Wales, with 12,000 men taking place. Parliamentarians win that, go to Chepstow, and about a 2-week siege of Chepstow Castle. Sir Nicholas Kemmis does not give up. He keeps fighting until a wall is breached. And then eventually, well, actually, I think the primary sources I've read say they killed him in cold blood. So I think they shot him for his parole. Right. But it was a very brave sort of ending. He's so important, really. Cromwell knew Sir Nicholas Kemmis as the arch traitor.
Oh, right. Gosh.
And when he died, his head was cut off and displayed. And the messenger who brought news to the Parliament that Sir Nicholas had died was given £50 for bringing the message.
Grief.
So that's what a thorn.
That in terms of the period, that is a couple of years' wages. 50 quid.
Yeah, it's an immense thing. And what I found with the Kemmis family is you hear a legend and you think it sounds romantic but unlikely, and then historical evidence pops up and you think, blimey, it's probably true again. They said that they managed to somehow get his head back and bury it at Michaelstone Yvedu Church in the Kemmis crypt. Now, in a lead cube, in a lead box. And I'd love to believe it. Would you like to see inside the crypt, Goff?
Yes, please, go on. Not quite the tour I was anticipating, but we'll go for it.
What do you see there?
Oh, my goodness, a lead box.
Yeah.
Oh, so that is the head of...
that must be the head of Sir Nicholas Kemmis. Isn't that amazing?
Oh, my goodness, isn't it? Yeah. Just as you say, like so many of these legends are just the romanticized gibberish. But there it is.
There it is. Now, this is being respectful, by the way. The Kemmis family like the crypt to be open every now and then so people won't forget. So we're not being ghoulish here.
No.
But isn't that incredible? There is exactly what the legend says.
Gosh. Oh,
I love legends that become true, really.
Yeah.
Because people, like you say, people dismiss them far too often, don't they?
Well, with some grounds, because an awful lot of these legends are hokey. You know, it's a fact.
True enough.
I mean, but it's lovely when they get proven, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
When they get proven.
And this is now at Chepstow Castle. It is a plaque which says about the death of Sir Nicholas Kemmis, which is also isn't it? So that's at Chepstow Castle. Now, we've got a whole line of baronets, I'm afraid, which we're not going to go through. They're all called Charles. We're all called Charles, but some of them are, for a couple of lines, are worth mentioning. For instance, the second baronet, who was, his son, also fought. Great battles. He was at St. Fagans. He had Sir Charles Kemmis's regiment of foot. He fought a bloody battle on Rumney Common. I'd love to know. And it is said that Cefn Mably was attacked. And they managed to see off a parliamentarian attack. Now, if you go through official reports, there is no report which says Cefn Mably was attacked. So again, you say, it's another one of these legends.
Hmm.
But in the 19th and early 20th century, when they were doing little archaeological explorations, they found lots of musket balls and even some armor from the
Oh,
Civil War
gosh, how
period.
interesting.
So I think it might have been a minor skirmish. And I
Yeah.
think it was attacked because in the years after the Civil War, Cefn Mably was not inhabited because of damage.
Oh, right.
So again, I
Oh,
think it probably was.
yeah. Well, yeah, balance of probability lines up there, didn't it?
So, and also when the Civil War ends, this is again shows how important the chemist family were. And I wish I knew how important in the Civil War era. You had to compound for your estate. You had to pay a fine for your estate, obviously, with the parliamentarians in power. And Sir Charles Chemist was charged £4,600, which was the largest in Wales.
Gosh.
He managed to get it down to £3,500 and 2 years in exile. But it's not. And again, the third baronet can't live at Cefn Mably, so he inherits by marriage Rupera Castle, a mile away, so he lives there.
Yeah.
For a while, the chemist family lived at Rupera Castle, but they still had to do up Cefn Mably, and it said that his wife Mary, who was a daughter of Lord Wharton, which will come important later, used wallpaper, and people believe that that might be the first use of wallpaper in Wales.
Oh, well.
Absolutely nonsensical and useless information for you all, courtesy of the Little Knowledge podcast.
But it's a little bit of knowledge, and I think it sits nicely in the programme. The first wallpaper in Wales.
Yeah.
Lovely. I think that's cool.
Is this familiar, Goth?
Oh yes, it's one of William Morgan as a youth. I can't remember quite which William now.
Well, I shall tell you. Where do you remember this from?
Tredegar House.
Yep, it dominated the stairwell at Tredegar House.
Oh, sorry, yes, on the stairs at Tredegar House. Yes, that's right. Beg your pardon.
Yeah, and what we have here is Sir Charles Chemist's fourth baronet, and William Morgan, who was the son of Thomas Morgan of Tredegar, and sadly, Thomas Morgan of Tredegar, the father dies in 1700. William here dies in 1699. So he does not inherit Tredegar, but Sir Charles does inherit Cefn Mably, and he's a cracker of a character. He really is. He is known, I shall have you know, I'm not sure how they managed to sort this out, as one of the 3 best dancers in Wales. He was always jigging around with Sir Charles Chemist.
Perhaps they had a slight a version of Strictly, as we so often. The dancing aristocracy version.
I don't know who else. Lewis of the Van was in top 3 as well, of the 3 best dancers of Wales. But fascinating character, because something we're going to talk about pretty soon is that he supported the Stuarts way after the Stuarts were gone. When William and Mary took over, Sir Charles headed off, and he helped rebuild Cefn Mably as well. He moved off into Europe, and there, in Hanover, he became extremely friendly with the Elector of Hanover, George, Elector of Hanover. Very friendly. They smoked pipes together. It was marvelous. And when he returned home to Cefn Mably in later years, George also moved, of course, to Britain as King George I.
Correct, that's right, yes. Oh, isn't that interesting?
And George I sent a message to Cefn Mably, summoning his old friend Sir Charles to smoke a pipe with him again. And the reply of Sir Charles was, I should be happy to smoke a pipe with you as Elector of Hanover, but not with one who calls himself King of England. Isn't that fascinating?
I'm not surprised by that.
And we have a little poem which sheds a little bit more light on what Cefn Mably must have been like under the dancing baronet here in the early 1700s. In Cefn Mably's halls, I ween, true loyalty is shown, devising plans even now to seat Royal James upon the throne. And messengers from Bar-le-Duc, in secret guises arrayed, convey the monarch's hope that Wales will don the white cockade. Jacobite Goth. The man was a Jacobite.
Indeed, this is the lovely thing that I think I've been sort of discovered and looked into a little bit. It's about we sort of think that the Civil War settled the matter. Oh, so my earphones coming out. That the Civil War settled the matter, but of course the Civil War didn't settle the matter. Because what you've got to remember is throughout the marches and throughout Wales particularly, but particularly throughout South Wales and the marches, it were moderate royalists, and they were people who defended the right of king over Parliament, and essentially believed in the divine right of kings, that the king's appointment came from God and not from Parliament. So obviously, when Charles I gets his head cut off, and there's the protectorate is in, these people obviously became very much the enemies of the state at the time. But of course, when the protectorate fails, the monarchy's back in. So you can say that in a way the Stuarts sort of come back. There's a return. Again, it's a constitutional monarchy. It's a different arrangement. There are a lot of people still, however, who believed in a divine right of monarchs, and that they didn't have any right. Parliament had no right over the monarch whatsoever. They would appoint these appointments of God. But of course, that failed again. One thing you can say about the Stuarts as a dynasty, they were not terribly successful. You only have only 4 of them. You know, James I was a very peculiar little man. Charles I has his head cut off. Charles II comes back and there's lots of time roistering, doistering, and eating oranges with Nell Gwyn. James II gets instantly booted out in the Glorious Revolution, which is essentially a parliamentary coup, where they invited in his daughter Mary and William of Orange to form a joint monarchy. Essentially, basically, if they landed, they would be unopposed. Charles II flees the country. So it was a sort of bloodless coup.
Sorry, James II flees the country.
What did I say? Did I say?
Oh, I thought you said Charles. Sorry.
I beg your pardon. I meant James II. So James II flees the country. So then you get this sort of bloodless coup, and the House of Orange turns up. And then you get the Act of Settlement, which in 1701 says that no Catholic can inherit. There's a means, really, of keeping the Stuarts out, because the Stuarts were a Catholic family. Because the one thing we also need to remember, is throughout the Civil War, it was not just as simple as Parliament versus the monarch. It is also, you've got the Catholic influence and the Protestant influence all wrapped up into it. Well, religion and politics are identical, the same thing. So, I mean, it was quite interesting. Towards the end of Charles II, you have something called the Popish Plot. Have you ever heard of that?
Of course.
Yeah, Popish Plot. Titus Oates, one of the most notorious perjurers ever to exist, who fabricated, with the assistance of a chap called Dr. Israel Tong, who was a frothing lunatic, about a huge Catholic conspiracy to basically take over the country and overturn the monarchy, which led to the sort of the background to the removal of James II and its fear of a Catholic monarch. But even at that point, because of the sort of the Catholic connection within Wales and southeast Wales, one of the people that turned up in support of Titus Oates was a chap called Captain Bedloe, who was a notorious charlatan who hailed from Chepstow, of all places, and who actually toured across Europe under various disguises, one of which was Lord Newport. Which is actually quite fascinating. But it's interesting that, again, he draws on this background of Catholicism from the area, this anti-monarchical Catholicism, if you like.
The Chemises were known as dangerous Catholics in the Elizabethan period.
Yeah, I guess, about to be Catholic at many points was to be dangerous, because you were perceived as being under the control of a foreign power vis-a-vis the papacy. So it's all about getting out from under the papacy as well. It's a very messy period to disentangle all of this. So basically, when after the Glorious Revolution, it bubbles along for a while. It gets under there. There is still this push to return the Stuarts. And particularly when, as you said, when we get to the start of the Georgians, the Hanoverian dynasty, their connection to the throne is very tangential. And there is quite clearly a Stuart heir to the throne, Bonnie Prince Charlie, Charles III. And this is then where the Jacobite rebellion rises up and the attempt to re-put Bonnie Prince Charlie back on the throne, all that sort of business. And that fails. They get down as far as Derby, and eventually they get beaten back up into Scotland. Bonnie Prince Charlie was, obviously was it a noble cause for an ignoble man? He was a twerp. They said the absolute twerp. I mean, when you finally get to the Battle of Culloden, I've been to the battlefield at Culloden, The Highlanders, being of Celtic warrior stock, had essentially one tactic: the charge. You charged in. If it didn't work, you ran off. That was the battle tactics of the Highlanders, a traditional Celtic battle tactic. And when you put them in the field, they couldn't charge in. Basically, this pitted, rotten, moggy bog of a thing. But you couldn't charge without breaking your ankle. So basically, he completely scuppered his own forces in a matter of minutes. But of course, the romanticism behind Prince Charles III, goes. Now, after 1745 and the defeat and a failure of Jacobitism, it goes underground. It doesn't disappear. But it becomes almost a form of secret society, where you're operating under the radar and still attempting to get it through. Because to be a Jacobite was exceptionally dangerous. There was a famous Welsh Jacobite called David Morgan of the Welsh Jacobite, who the Morgans of Tredegar latterly in the 19th century claimed association with. We may come back to him a little bit later on about this. But he had a thoroughly appalling end, because they really wanted to stamp this out. I've got a little description of the end of from the Cambrian Journal, that was published in 1861, about what happened to David Morgan, the Welsh Jacobite. He and two other gentlemen, Colonel Townley and another gentleman whose name I can't quite spot at the moment, they were going to be hung, drawn and quartered. That was the penalty for it. So it says, after breakfast, their irons were struck off, Colonel Townley being the first to have them removed and Mr. Morgan the second. They were then pinioned, and while the sledges were being placed in readiness, this is where the drawing is, you're drawn along on a sledge. So they haul them all off to the gallows. They get to the gallows, and decided to place a pile of faggots. The doomed men are removed from the sledges of the cart and placed under the beam, for the purpose of receiving and turning them off. Isn't that a lovely phrase? That's how you don't execute them, you turn them off.
Turn them off.
Fires started, they're going in. Basically, they hang them for 3 minutes. The soldiers then remove their lower clothing. The executioner then takes off the rest of their clothing. Colonel Townley's put on a slab when they realise that he might still be alive, so which the executioner very kindly just cuts his throat, as if you were, disposing of a pig, basically. He then proceeds to remove the bowels and heart, which he threw into the fire. The head was afterwards severed from the body with a cleaver, and both were then placed in the coffin which stood ready to receive them. The body of poor David Morgan was the next to undergo the same disgusting and barbarous mutilation, which was repeated in succession on all other victims, terminating with the unhappy Dawson, after which the executioner shouted, "God save King George," to which the multitude responded with a yell. Well, having seen that, frankly, they would, wouldn't they?
Definitely. Absolutely.
They actually produced a speech that David Morgan, the Jacobite, gave at his trial, and also on the gallows itself, they actually distributed leaflets and pamphlets. And the journal at the time is a little bit pro. So we say Jacobite, so they say that although the crowd had jeered them to the gallows, they respected them and their principles at the end. Who knows? I think we would have turned out to watch an execution. It was a day out, wasn't it? You got a pie. If you're lucky, got drunk and a snog on the way home. That was a good day out. Fun for all the family, basically. So you paid the price to be a Jacobite. So therefore, you had to, if you wanted to continue your principles, which was based upon this twin threat, as it was seen at the time, one of which was republicanism, because democracy was seen as on the rise. If Parliament was, the primary force, then why do you need the monarch at all? And then, of course, the other opposition to Parliament, which is virtually, divine monarchy, the monarchy appointed of God, and the Jacobites sit on that side. So you have the Republicans on one side, and you have the Jacobites, or the legitimists, as they came to be called, on the other side.
You said that you weren't surprised about the chemists being Jacobites, or the fourth baronet, but the fourth baronet saying that to King George. I mean, that's an anomaly, right?
That's an anomaly. Well, no, because it's about these are matters of principle. Yeah, you can like the man, but you don't think he has a right to be king. You remember, these are people who were devoutly believed in this principle of the divine appointment of the monarch. So to see, so as far as they were concerned, George I and the Hanoverians were not legitimate monarchs. They were parliamentary placements, parliament's puppets, they were considered at the time. And this rumbles and rumbles on. I mean, there is a resurgence, believe it or not, of Jacobitism in the late 19th century.
That did surprise me, yeah.
Yeah, which is a period when the Morgan family at Tredegar start claiming relationship to David Morgan, the Welsh Jacobite, which is again intriguing. Why, why does that? Why do the Morgans always line up on whoever's going to bring the monarch down? But they've done it forever. That family, they would line up on, with Llewellyn the Great, Owain Glyndwr, Tudor, and even now in in this phase they align at the latter part of the 19th century, because basically after Prince Albert dies, Queen Victoria goes into this prolonged period of mourning. And again, there are rumblings of republicanism coming into the country at the time. She was not popular for a lot of the latter part of her reign. The only real sort of public support and affection she seems to get is at the Diamond Jubilee, when she actually appears. And there's even a picture of her smiling in a carriage. You never even saw her. She just retreated onto the Isle of Wight and into Balmoral.
The widow of Windsor and then the Isle of Wight, yeah.
Yeah. Now, in the 1891, which is again 30 years after Prince Albert dies, you have the forming of the Legitimist Jacobite League of Great Britain and Ireland, which is a wonderful name. And it comes out, it's, if you like, it's a public face of what have been underground organizations for quite a while. They were following on from a group which is known as the Cycle of the White Rose, or the Cycle Club, which sounds to me like a sort of bicycling organization. I think it's what a wonderful way to subvert, Parliament by setting you're off on bicycles in the Cycle Club. Yeah, but the prominent example, the Order of the Cycle Club, and eventually it came sort of above the thing and became the Order of the White Rose. Which were, and they're part of this neo-Jacobite revival of the 1890s.
A founding member of which was a chemist of Cefn Mably.
Oh, well, no, that's very interesting, because he doesn't mention it in the text that I found. But again, Williams Wynn is the family that's mentioned here, and they're in North Wales.
Yeah.
So
it's very big in North Wales.
We've got this Welsh Jacobitism, which is something we think of Jacobites being associated with Scots. Not as simple as that, yet again, something else a little bit more complicated. Now, eventually, the Order of the White Rose sort of turns and it moves into the Legitimist Jacobite League of Great Britain. And I remember I read an article I subsequently lost somewhere, written in 1897, when they are attempting to step aside from the Jacobite tag and say they want to be considered Legitimists, not Jacobites. And it's about the legitimate heir. And then the League, this League, it was one of a number of associations. It was one of the more prominent. The Legitimist Jacobite League of Great Britain and Ireland runs up until after the First World War.
The value is amazing, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and it's interesting. It goes down a little bit. Public sympathy turns against them during the First World War, and their principles, the beliefs of the League of Legitimists is quite astonishing today. And it says it is animated by the spirit of loyalty and chivalry, which animates the hearts of so many good and brave men and women in the past, to oppose the false and impractical ideas of liberty and equality that the Jacobite Party exists today to stand against. Yes, quite. Yes, maybe not quite the organisation we were hoping they would turn out to be. But no. Yeah, so they go on. Now, after the First World War, during the First World War, it dips. But afterwards, you get another upturn, another uptick in Jacobitism. So in 1926, you have the founding of the Royal Stuart Society, which sees itself as like the heir to these early organisations. The Royal Stuart Society still exists. It's still there to promote the legitimacy of the Stuart line. It even has a website, which is the royalstuartsociety.com. It defines itself as monarchist and traditionalist, and it is headed by the Governor General of the Royal Society, which is Murray Beauclerk, 14th Duke of St Albans. And it is still going on.
I'm very interested if the current chemist family, or chemist Tint family, Lord Swarton actually, are either members of this or are interested in it. If you are a chemist Do let us know. Are you
Tell us.
still secretly a Jacobite?
It's
Do let us know.
Yeah. And just for interest for us all, the current heir to the Stuart line is the magnificently named Franz Bonaventura Adelbert Maria Herzog von Bayern, who title of Duke of Bavaria, and he's the head of the House of Wittelsbach. Fascinating man. He was born in 1933. At 1939, his family were anti-Nazis, and they fled to Hungary. Hungary was then taken, and they were imprisoned. And he actually spent some time as a child in Dachau, which is quite astonishing, And he got through that. He is now a member of the Order of the Holy Sepulchre, and he's still going, and he's still very much there. There's a wonderful quote, however, where he said, were it not for the Act of Settlement in 1701, France would be successor to the British Crown. His spokesman, however, has made it clear that this is a purely hypothetical issue and not a claim that France pursues. There we are.
Well, that's good.
Quite nice.
That's interesting. I mean, that's interesting.
So it didn't really go away, but this brings us back to something which is almost right back to the beginning of it. I remember at stories of Viscount Evan Tredegar at Tredegar House, at one point claiming to have a piece of the gallows of David Morgan in the Brown Room, but they would show to guests, and also the Edney gates, the large 17th century gates there at the time that Evan lived there. I think there was a hedgerow in front of them, and the guest asked him if they were ever opened, and he said, no, they will only be opened to the true heir of the Stuart line. And I think that was Francis' father that he was talking about at the time. He did slightly over-egg the pudding by claiming that his father Courtney had refused to open the gates to Edward VII after Edward VII had in fact been dead. For
3 years,
For 3 years. Like a lot of things with Viscount Evan Tredegar, he did embroider, but like an all embroidery, there is a baseline of fabric on which the colours are added. So I think you need to look at it. And Crowley, Alistair Crowley, wickedest man in Europe, who was one of Evan's mates, leading occultist, also claimed to be a Jacobite legitimist. So it was still trundling along. It may be some aspects of society. So again, right into the 1930s there, before the Second World War. So it's fascinating how we think, again, I said that we think the ramifications of the Civil War ended when Parliament won, and they didn't. They ran on for at least a century afterwards in actual, warfare. And even then, long past 1745 onwards, there's still this rumbling in the background of Jacobite and legitimist sympathies. And a lot of it in this part of the world. Now, was it because they were Catholic families? Was it because they were moderate royalist families? Was it the fact they just had never accepted the principle that Parliament had a right over what they considered a divine appointment? Who knows?
I think it probably helps the Catholicism. Monmouthshire was the most Catholic of counties. And I think the chemists, you said moderate royalists, which the Morgans certainly were. At the time, the chemist family was described as extreme royalists. They were going to give everything for the Stuart crown. And it appears from what we've learned, they carried on. Let's have a little look at Cefn Mably, shall we?
Yeah.
A little look as it looked in the 19th century. So there it is. It's vines everywhere, isn't it? Ivy everywhere.
They love their ivy.
They loved a bit of ivy. So it's as you'd expect. Lots of portraits everywhere. Wish we had one of Sir Nicholas. There is one of Sir Nicholas somewhere on the walls here.
Oh, right.
What I do like about Cefn Mably, though, is, that's a bit spooky. What on earth are these cutouts? Can you see those?
Oh yes. Yes.
They were tiny.
I think they were. Some of them were fire screens.
Oh, do you think it's a fire screen?
I think the dog's a fire screen. Yeah. I don't know about the little one. The little chap is high up enough to be near a lady's face sitting in a chair.
Well spotted.
So it's possible they were fire screens. What
I like about Cefn Mably, though, it did have secret passages. In the Great Hall, there were several springs where if you pressed it, revealed a blocked up doorway. One revealed the staircase leading down below the library, which originally you probably could have got out to get to the River Rumney and escape. So this is a place with genuine hiding places.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, genuine secret passages, because everybody's supposed to have a secret passage.
Oh, yeah, real secret passages.
Oh, cool.
I love it. Look at the tapestries on the walls.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
it's a beautiful place.
Yeah.
Now, this is that great dancer, remember? Sir Charles, the fourth baronet. This is the dancing gallery.
Oh, cool.
Beautiful. And there's this wonderful, if you could oblige me, John Curl Fletcher wrote about this. And I just love what it bewilders me to this day, honestly, the way he said. What do you reckon about this? Above the soldiers' gallery is another long, narrow room, beautifully panelled in oak, called the dancing gallery. And at the sight of its long, shining oak floor, the mind goes back to the days when Sir Charles Chemist of Cefn Mably was one of the 3 best dancers in Wales.
Yeah.
But today, the only trip in on the floor is when the elderly caretaker goes down the room to open the door of the bishop's bedroom. It is a queer place for a bedroom, though quite cosy, and the bishop was able to watch the dancers go gliding past his bedroom by raising a little grilled hatch in the door.
Oh, God.
A peeping bishop. There's also a very grim room here called the gallows room. Very small room with a beam with a drop. Now, I'm not sure. Would you really hang people in your house?
If this is, I'm presuming, in the oldest part of the house.
Yeah.
It may be. They did operate courts from within their properties in the great halls.
And Edward was the High Sheriff, right?
Yeah, and Edward was the High Sheriff. I know Cefn Tretower Court, for example, was also a courthouse, was used for a courthouse. So it is quite possible that the sizes were held and people were hung. It might possible.
Be. Others have suggested that Sir Nicholas Chemist might have used it to keep order with his troops, because there is a soldiers' gallery with a familiar table for Yugoth.
Very interesting. Now, by merest coincidence today, I bumped into a friend of mine called Richard Friend. We were having coffee at the Ridgeway Cafe at the top of in the sun, enjoying himself. He brought his grandson, and he revealed to me a secret story, which I shall now reveal. He is the man who discovered the Cefn Mably shovelboard in the bowels of Newport Civic Centre.
Wow.
Yeah,
it had been abandoned, hasn't it? Really?
Yeah, it had been abandoned. It had been taken from Tredegar House and placed for safekeeping within the Civic Centre. And people more or less forgot where it was, and it was behind sort of some pan. And he saw this sticking out, and eventually they revealed it, and he discovered that the board was all there. It looks a little longer in this picture than it is currently at Tredegar House, though. Is there a bit?
It is 40 feet long, but they have added an extra bit. But the original thing is 42 feet long.
Okay.
There were enormous trees. I mean, there was one tree that was so large that when it died, the Chemist family capped it. They put a lead cap on the top and kept it. And when in the 1770s, I think, a gale brought it down from the branches, and from it they got 31 tons of wood.
Good Lord.
So when you know that, you realise.
We failed to mention that the Cefn Mably shovelboard is one piece, one plank.
Yeah,
it's one solid piece of wood, a plank. And it was like a slightly more vigorous form of shove halfpenny.
Yeah.
Is that you had like a little disc, which you started at one end of the table and you whacked it with a paddle, and you had to see how far you could get it up the table past certain marking points. So yeah, it's a huge shove halfpenny board. Basically.
It is. And it's in its original place here, the Soldiers' Gallery, but can now be seen at the Orangery at Tredegar House.
Yeah. Well, hopefully when it reopens.
Well, yes. But here we've got, it's called King Charles II's bedroom.
Oh, I see Charles II above the cupboard there.
Now, there's no historical record that King Charles II that I can find did go there, but it's very interesting that, you know what Cefn Mably is like. Legends tend to have a kernel of truth, and it's been passed down that at some point King Charles II stayed at Cefn Mably with his bishop, hence the bishop's room.
Oh, well,
so it does make sense. I wouldn't put it past it to be true.
That's intriguing, though, that he didn't get anywhere near Tredegar House, and the Morgans had spent time in the exiled court of Charles II when it was in Holland. I presume the chemist must have hung around at the same time.
By the way, you're right about the tint part.
let's say, yeah, the chemist Tid. Where did that come in?
Well, the chemist family, after the dancing baronet, as I've dubbed him, the fourth baronet died. He was unmarried. And his sister Jane married a Sir John Tint of Halswell House in Somerset. And eventually the family changed their name to the chemist Tints. But unfortunately, they really often used their primary residence as Halswell House. So Cefn Mably was sort of relegated for a lot of the time into a secondary residence.
Oh, that's interesting.
Hence the caretaker that I mentioned.
Cool.
But yeah, that's the way it works. Even later on, you can still see it's still looking pretty good. I mean, this is just before the sale to Lord Tredegar.
And that's when is that?
This is the Great Hall of Cefn.
Yeah, no. When was the sale to Lord?
Oh, sorry, 1920.
That's right. I thought for some reason I was going to say 30s on account because Courtney died in 34.
It's interesting to know that the chemist Tint family continued the tradition of staying in societies with secrets, because one of the 19th century chemist Tints was the provincial Grand Master of the Freemasons. So they continued that sort of secrecy. But by 1916...
So are you aware that throughout the 1700s, Freemasons were considered dangerous spreaders of democracy? That's an interesting thing for some monarchical supporters.
I would also suggest
of a dangerous spreaders of democracy.
I would also suggest it's a very odd thing for a Roman Catholic to be, which means I suggest that later chemist Tints may have altered their faith, I think. Possibly.
Yeah, abandoned them.
But yes, you're quite right. Lord Wharton, they finally got an old title from abeyance, and they became Lord Wharton. And the 9th Baron Wharton married the last Lady Tredegar when she was widowed. So the chemist family get everywhere, don't they?
Oh, right. I didn't know that. Oh, how interesting.
But as you quite rightly say, it was sold to, in 1920, they sold their lands, about 8,000 acres in Monmouthshire and Glamorgan, retired to Somerset and Halswell House, and Lord Tredegar bought Cefn Mably, and it became a sanatorium, I should say.
Well, he bought it essentially just for the hunting land, wasn't it? The right to hunt on the land.
Yeah.
And there was some suggestion he was going to use it as a hunting lodge, but really it's too big as a hunting lodge, isn't it? So he did. So he gave it over as a TB clinic.
There was no point in having it as a hunting lodge because it's a mile away from Rupera Castle.
Oh, of course. I forgot all about that.
So what he did was, you're quite right, he allowed them to use it as a TB hospital. And it later, in fact, had 112 patients when it was opened. It opened in 1923, 112 patients. In 1948, it joined the NHS and it became, as they called it then, a geriatric hospital. And it was until 1983.
Oh, good Lord. How interesting.
Now, we're going to look at something...
If I'm right, we knew a gentleman who had been there when it was a TB clinic, didn't we? One of the former friends of Tredegar House, a gentleman called Cyril
Hyman.
And am I right that when the changeover was done and they started to convert it into this apartment that it's now become, there was a period where he actually went up there, I think, with one of the curators at Tredegar House and actually...
And me.
And saw... Oh, and it was you, was it?
Yes, I was there, yeah.
Oh, I didn't realise.
The beautiful thing was he was there and he remembers the windows being open constantly as they believed fresh air for TB. But he met his wife there. So it was a very tender place.
It's a lovely man, Cyril. It's very fond.
But it was abandoned. And we've got, if I can share them, an artist called Amanda Clegg actually went round there years ago when it was an abandoned hospital and took some photographs. So before we finish, let's have a little look at those, shall we?
Yeah.
If I can get
that'll be intriguing.
Absolutely. Now that isn't the hospital, obviously, but here we are. Right, you ready? So here we go. That's what it looks like. It's early 90s, I think. She went the late 80s, early 90s. So we're going in.
Oh,
up the steps we go.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Pigeons.
Oh, yeah.
Mosaic. The dentist's room of Cefn Mably Hospital. And there we have the Soldiers' Gallery. How different it looks.
You're quite, yeah.
And they turned it into a ward. You can see the lights.
Oh, yes,
down.
yeah.
Up the stairs. The pink staircase, I'll have you know.
Right.
Fire exit. How atmospheric, you know.
It is, isn't it? It's very strange.
I'm not sure what that room is. Maybe it leads to the gallows room or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are all these kind of
Oh, hey, that's very evocative, isn't it? The tiles on the floor. Yeah,
Yes, that's the wet ward. Rightly speaking, looking at the floor.
yeah, the wet ward.
Yes,
What is that?
I
What was
have
the wet
no
ward?
idea whatsoever. But so brilliant pictures.
Somebody tell us if you know what a wet
Tell us
ward
what
in
a
a
wet
TV
ward
hospital
is.
would be.
So that's amazing. I mean, she's gone around
Yeah.
this spooky sort of place. And but when you we've seen it, haven't we? We've seen it with every property almost we've talked about. Everything survives as long as it's not left, as long as it's not abandoned. You mentioned Tredegar House. It's still there because it became a hospital.
Yeah.
If it's abandoned for any length of time. And then in 1994, there was a terrible, terrible fire which ripped through the abandoned. It was in a terrible state by this time anyway, if we're completely honest. It ripped through it, and that's the Great Hall.
Oh, gosh. That's heartbreaking, isn't it? Oh, how terrible. Oh,
it really
gosh.
is. But
I thought it was more intact than that when they came to do
practically every internal fit-in was gone. The only good thing is a lot of the fireplaces and a lot of the panelling and a screen, which is now at Berkeley Castle, were taken out when it became a hospital.
Oh, right.
So there were no treasures there, but nevertheless. No. And so they turned it, as you rightly said at the beginning, into a gated community. If you look at Cefn Mably today, from above, you can see there it is.
Yeah.
Still there, the outside, and all of these homes have been added.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's huge area, isn't it?
It is.
Well, gosh. Well.
And what can you do with a gallery?
Well,
so they've turned it.
Yeah. Well.
Haven't they made an intriguing?
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. Interesting.
That's a very, very, very key.
I've got to say, though, if you live in the gallery at Cefn Mably, this is another little bit, a nice one to sort of almost finish off with.
Yeah.
After such a visit, it is possible to dream of the shining floor of the dancing gallery at Cefn Mably, and hear the swish of silken skirts and tapping of dancing feet, and perhaps you may catch the strains of the harp and the fiddle playing Sir Charles's Delight. And if you are lucky, you may even catch a glimpse of that old bishop peeping benignly through the little grilled hatch. I'm worried about the peeping bishop there. I've said.
Yeah. I just worry they turned it into a bathroom. And as the ghost of a peeping bishop in their bathroom.
So there we are. I say that's Cefn Mably. I always say that's this. Of course it isn't.
Yeah.
We have scratched the surface of another magnificent property.
Certainly fascinating. I didn't to hear so much about the provenance of that household for such a long time. And again, the chemist family are mostly invisible, really. Their names, they were certainly a very, very influential family, particularly in the Civil War period. That's fascinating.
Yeah, but history lives on. You don't have to have access to the property. I mean, the stories can still be told, and these characters don't need to be forgotten, really.
History is people, my man. Buildings are great. We may focus on buildings, but it's the people who live there that made them. They didn't grow on their own.
No.
Even someday you can try and get to the artisanship of some of these buildings. We'll talk about the people who built them, not just the people who lived in them. That'd be a lovely program to maybe look into to find out what we know about the people that put these places up.
But I'm sure
when people come out of a building, it dies.
Yes,
if you're a building to make it, keep it alive.
If you're a curator of a property, as curators all know, you're a curator of memories, not just a curator of the bricks and mortar. Well, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be back very soon. Goodbye.
Bye.